Welcome to another immigration art video. My name is Art Serratelli, and if you have a concern, we can address it. This video deals with the subject of green cards sponsored through employment. There are several categories of green card sponsored through employment. There is a stratification system of preferences. The higher your preference, the faster you get the green card. That's a general rule. There is the employment-based preference 1 green card category. The employer-sponsored green cards in this EB1 preference category are 1, outstanding professor and researcher category, and 2, the intra-company transferee green card, which corresponds to an L1A work visa, the temporary dual intent category L1A. L1A equals EB1. Keep that in mind. Let's focus on the EB1 outstanding professor category. What is an outstanding professor or a researcher? What does that mean? An outstanding professor or a researcher is essentially someone who works on a college campus, and I'll give you a link to the full description. I'm giving you an overview now, but I'll send you to the U.S. government website to learn more about this. Essentially, if you're an outstanding professor or a researcher, you prove that by using the same criteria that you would use to prove the extraordinary ability or national interest waiver self-sponsored green cards, and I have a separate video about those. But when I say the same criteria, what I mean is essentially you use the same type of documentary evidence, but you organize it in a different way and use it to make a different point. So what point are we trying to make? We're trying to make the point that in this case, you have not, like the extraordinary ability self-sponsored green card, you have not reached the best of the best in your field. You are not among the top of your field, but you're good. You're very, very good. You were judged to be very good in a pool of candidates, and you were assessed to be the best candidate, so you got the job. So you're good. And we want you to prove that you're good, that you're outstanding, and you prove that you're outstanding by using the same evidence as in the self-sponsored categories. You present evidence that you've published papers in refereed journals. You present evidence that you've presented conference findings of research, or you've presented papers at a conference, or you presented conclusions, scientific conclusions at a symposium. You've had articles written about you and your work in the popular press or in the trade press. If you're an archaeology professor, you're written up in I'm making this up, Archaeology Digest, and all your peers know who you are. You perhaps have reviewed articles submitted for a scholarly journal, and you get to select the articles that should be considered for publication. Perhaps you review the work of others. You're on a panel, a thesis committee, where you judge the research and conclusions and the oral defense of a thesis by a master's degree or a PhD student. Another thing you show in this category is that you are doing your job in a way that is really outstanding. There's something different about how you approach the work. And you use, again, as I mentioned in the prior video about self-sponsorship, you use reference letters to prove that what you're doing is really outstanding. Your peers where you work right now, the people who you report to in your department, the people on your selection committee, perhaps outside your organization you get letters from folks at other universities, other academic centers in America and overseas. You perhaps, if you work with industry leaders, maybe someone from a private company or a corporation of some sort could write you a letter of reference. Maybe your work interlocks with government policy and government research for a very critical industry. The military industrial complex perhaps loves your work on jet propulsion, and someone in the Department of Defense writes you a letter saying, yeah, this professor, this researcher is really outstanding. They've done this and this and this and this to help us help defend the United States. As another piece of evidence, you could perhaps explain how you are a member of certain professional societies or organizations that have admitted you to the membership based upon your achievements, based upon your accomplishments. Perhaps you've won a prize, a scholarship. Perhaps you've won a recognition for the most outstanding researcher in, I don't know, perhaps you're a Civil War historian and you just wrote a best-selling book that's sweeping the nation in the general public and in academic circles. If you've won a book award, great, wonderful. Perhaps you're a scientist and your work has achieved such unique status that it's eligible for and did receive a patent. The United States government issued a patent for your work. That's perfect. So those are the kinds of pieces of evidence we use in these sorts of cases. The EB2, the second preference employment-based immigration category, has essentially, there's two types, essentially. One is for professors. If you are a professor, your case is subject to special handling, and I'll explain what that means. And if you are a worker whose job requires a master's degree or higher, then you are in the EB2 category because your job not only requires the master's degree or higher, but you're in a special EB2 category which requires advertising to test the United States labor market. Okay, what are the differences? Why is a professor going to be treated with special handling in the labor certification process, and why is an ordinary worker like an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, why are they going to be subject to a labor certification? A labor certification simply means before we can let an international worker take a spot permanently out of the United States workforce, we need to make sure that there's no American who could do the job and is willing and able to do the job and qualified to do the job. Because if there is, well, then we should give the American the first shot at that job. But if there's no one in the labor market currently that can do the job other than the international worker, then the international worker is entitled to get a green card to keep doing the job or to begin doing the job. So this testing of the labor market, this labor certification, has as a goal routinely, the goal of the labor certification is to find the American with the minimum qualifications required to do the job. If you're a professor and you are on campus teaching and instructing the future world leaders and thinkers for the next generation, we don't want the American to be found with just the minimum qualifications. We don't want to just leave the teaching of the future scholars and scientists of the world to just someone with the minimum, the bare minimum. We want the best. We want, in a search for a professor, and this is what special handling means, we want the professor search to not find the minimum person in the American workforce with the qualifications. We want to find the best person. So the advertising is inherently different for a professor. There's a search committee. They interview candidates. The search committee. They prepare documented written reports on each candidate and why the one they select is the best. So because they're selecting the best, we don't have to do any extra work to prove to the immigration service that the individual selected, the international professor, we don't have to prove anything extra than we've already done. In other words, if we have a university that has gone through the recruiting process to find the best, and the best is an international worker, then that person gets the opportunity for a green card in the EB2 category, and it's special handling because we're just going to submit to the government the same advertising and the same report of the recruiting committee that's already in existence. For a regular labor cert case in the EB2 category, we would have to start testing the labor market from scratch with new advertisements at the time the worker says, I would like to obtain a green card through this job, and the employer says, okay, I agree with that. So at the time that mutually is decided by the employer and the employee, then we have to do the advertising. So for a normal EB2 labor certification, advertising begins, and the goal is to find the minimum credentials with an American, and if we don't, then we are allowed to give the job to the international worker. There are other categories in the employment-based green card category. An EB3 classification is for a job that requires the worker to have at least a bachelor's degree. Also in the EB3 category, there are other workers, skilled workers. Essentially, it's a catch-all category. So in here, you've got not only white-collar bachelor's degree workers, accountants, finance majors, quality control managers, science teachers, operations managers for condominium associations, grade school teachers, medical technologists. Also in this category, you've got other workers that don't require a 4-year college degree. So the wait in this category is usually the longest because there's so many different kinds of people in the category. Everybody from a white-collar accounting major to a blue-collar chef, a personal caregiver. This category is ill-conceived, in my opinion, and the lines are too long because the different types of workers lumped into this category, again, in my opinion, offer different skill sets to the American economy, and it seems a little foolhardy to lump everybody together. Do we need an accountant more than we need an executive chef? I don't know. But we're treating them exactly the same. And somebody somewhere made a policy decision to do that, unless this just happened by accident and nobody thought about it. So that's why if someone asks you, why is the wait for the EB3 so long? And the answer is because a personal caregiver and an accountant and a quality control manager and a executive chef are all being treated the same way. Another category is the EB4, Employment-Based Preference 4 category. This category is usually as fast as the EB1. There's less demand for this category. It's usually for religious workers or other special workers like government workers or people who work for an NGO and they want to get a green card based upon their work. And then the last, the EB5, this is an entire video all by itself. The EB5 category essentially is a green card for investment. I personally would think twice about this category. There are other ways to accomplish what this category is designed to do in, frankly, a cheaper, more cost-effective, more realistic business-like fashion. the EB-5 as it stands now is an investment-based green card. If you invest either $500,000 or $1 million of capital in a regional investment economic development center, or if you start your own business with $500,000 or $1 million, depending upon where your business is located, they'll, quote, give you a green card. But it's not that simple. It's a conditional green card. You have to create 10 jobs by either saving a business or creating a new one, and you have to have economic reports showing the economic impact of the business you're becoming involved with. It's a complicated, currently, in my opinion, an overly bureaucratic system which can be circumvented using an L1A or an E visa as the temporary work visa to get you here, and then we can figure out how to put you in another category, the EB1 or the EB2 or the EB3 category, and it's going to cost a lot less than $500,000 or $1 million. As a final note, as a final concept to consider in making the decision which green card category do you fit into, and oh, by the way, you can apply for as many green cards as you have categories that apply to you. So if you are in a category where you could be an outstanding professor, or you could be a candidate for a self-sponsored national interest waiver, or just a regular old PERM special handling case, a labor certification special handling case, apply for 3 green cards. And the one that gets approved first, ding ding, that one's the winner. And the other ones, well, they're irrelevant at that point. A final concept to consider is a subjectively determined application versus an objectively determined application. A PERM labor certification, whether it's special handling or just a regular test of the labor market through advertising, that is probably the most objective green card we're going to get. You must follow the rules for advertising, or you must follow the rules for selecting the best professor under the special handling rules. If you did A and B and C, then you will get approved for the labor cert, and that is the most, in my opinion, difficult part of the process. So some people may favor a labor certification because it's objective. If you do these things, you get an approval. Another person may like the subjectivity of a self-sponsored green card petition, or a green card that is sponsored by an employer but in a subjective EB1 category. So for example, how do you prove that you're really an outstanding professor? Isn't that a matter of opinion? That's subjective. Who determines that, and how is it judged? I told you the evidence that we submit, but one immigration adjudicator's opinion could differ from another immigration adjudicator's opinion. In my experience, if you do the cases professionally and methodically and thoroughly, the chance of approval for an objective one is just as great as the approval for a subjective one, but some clients may feel more comfortable with the objective labor certification, and that's perfectly fine. Or some clients may say, you know what, I really am working at the best of the best. Bring on the subjective evaluation. I'm going to win. So keep that in mind as well. And if you have any questions about anything, always feel free to contact us here at Immigration Art.